Just a quick update. Who remembers this guy from part 2?
Prince Patel, how
There's
are
no
you,
need
Prince?
to introduce me, James, to people at home. They already know who I am. They see the long dark hair, the big dark eyes, the high cheekbones, the big lips, the straight white teeth, and the jawline sculpted by Michelangelo himself. I'm the future of the division. I'm the future of boxing, period. Because Prince Patel is going to become the face of British boxing.
We can confirm he is no longer the face of British boxing after suffering multiple setbacks since our last update. Welcome back to When Hype Jobs Face Reality here on Boxing Legends TV.
On Saturday night, watch me kick Tyson's ass!
On this series, we recap careers of fighters that at one point were considered, at least by some, to be the next big breakout star in the sport of boxing.
He is the American hope, or hype.
If you've seen this series before, you'll know we cover a wide range of talent, so some features are more tragic than they are satisfying or funny. Or in other words, some are more underachievers than they are overrated. If you're enjoying the more regular uploads, show your support by pressing that like button. Without any further ado, let's start by rewinding the clock to 2014, when the biggest and scariest prospect the world has ever seen was causing mayhem among the club fighter scene in the United States. When the 7-foot, 290-pound heavyweight Taishan Dong burst onto the scene in 2014, the boxing world didn't really know what to expect because no one had ever heard of him.
That's it, beautiful.
He hailed from China and had a supposed MMA and basketball background, yet outside of a terrible kickboxing contest with Bob Sapp, the boxing world had no real way to gauge his potential. Then, in stepped the boxing media to flood their websites with favorable articles such as the Chinese 7-footer ready to dominate the boxing world, and the hilariously titled, Meet the Real-Life Ivan Drago, which makes literally no sense at all.
I love for one ESPN's description of him, body of a Greek god, they say, fist like medium-sized cannonball.
Go again.
More fuel was added to the fire by those in his team, one of which being the very credible former world champion turned trainer Buddy McGirt, who had high expectations for the Chinese giant.
The power is real, ladies and gentlemen.
He's the real deal.
After signing with Golden Boy Promotions in 2014, Taishan made his pro debut on Fox Sports against the expertly trained diver Alex Roseman, who had a history of just falling over against heavyweight prospects.
Here we go, this is round one. There's a left hand.
You will not often see a fighter score 5 or so knockdowns in 2 rounds and receive criticism, but honestly, Taishan looked terrible.
What can they expect from you in 2015? What kind of performance do you expect to put on in the ring?
乐趣的 KO 获胜。
In 2015, my goal is to KO every single fight.
Well, that didn't happen. 2015 was the year everyone, including Taishan himself, realized he couldn't fight, scraping through split decisions in 4-round bouts against low-tier club fighters.
You know, I was actually pleasantly surprised. First of all, I'm glad he didn't get knocked out.
One of the fights on YouTube is simply titled, Taishan Dong beats up couch potato Lance Gouch, just to give you an idea of how boxing fans viewed his opponents, but in all fairness, it was actually a decent KO.
Yeah, Buddy has had to start from scratch.
Wow! With the right, and it's over.
Taishan mysteriously retired in 2015 with a record of 6-0. However, we recently discovered that after some top sparring down at the Wildcard Gym, Dong got a reality check against some top-rated guys and realized the sport wasn't for him. More recently, Taishan signed with the WWE, but hasn't featured on an event as of this video's release. Perhaps a 2021 rematch with Lance Gouch is on the cards, as the American is unbeaten in his last 4 outings. HBO Boxing has the worst reputation for creating hype jobs. Fighters like Michael Grant, Samuel Peter, and James Kirkland are few among many others. Yet to the network's dying breath, they never gave up. They had a dream to see the glory years of Jewish boxing return to prominence. And the man to do it was none other than the Hebrew Hammer himself, Cletus Seldin.
I don't really, you guys know, the bell rings. I got no respect for anybody. I'm here to hurt you.
An athlete, born into a family of athletes, Seldon's physical potential was discovered at a young age as he excelled in American football, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and even held the New York State 66-kilogram limit deadlift record. However, boxing became Seldon's career of choice, turning professional at 25 years old and fighting under the Star Boxing banner on non-televised shows.
I'm like you, I don't know how soon I got up from that.
You can't deny the overhand right carried legit knockout power, yet Seldon's reputation started to precede itself once he began running his mouth whenever the boxing media were around.
Absolutely, I'm the guy who can, I can talk the talk and walk the walk. I have the hardest punch in the sport, and people want to see a style like mine. Boom!
After building up a record of 21-0 with 18 knockouts, HBO Boxing began featuring the New Yorker on their undercards. Roberto Ortiz became his first victim on the new platform, beating the Mexican in a decent 3-round shootout, which in turn ramped up the hype train even more.
I put the work in, you can see what happened just going 3 or 4 rounds with me. I am a wrecking machine from Long Island.
On December 16, 2017, Billy Joe Saunders put slick boxing back on the map with sensational schooling over the stone-cold KO artist, David Lemieux.
He gets in with a body shot, partially blocked, and that's missed by Mayer, just looking out into the crowd to see where it lands. But only looking confused, he's starting to look a little bit busted up.
The performance deserved all the credit it got, and more. However, as the folks that tuned in to watch the whole event will recall, Lemieux wasn't the only man taken to school that night.
And in the first of our 3 bouts, it's the second chance for us to look at the man called the Hebrew Hammer, Cletus Seldin from Shirley.
Roughly an hour before the main event even started, Seldon took on the relatively unknown Yves Ulysse Jr.
Elite fighters like Arturo Gatti. Cletus Seldin, we don't know how he'll respond when someone really pushes him.
Ulysse, a decent boxer in his own right, was a local fighter touted for his box and move style, a style that would undoubtedly counteract Seldon's plot and punch approach. Yet, because of the hype, the bookmakers had Seldon a clear favorite. I can only imagine how rapidly the live odds changed.
It's the interesting pressure fighter who can hit.
It was like watching Mayweather versus Gotti or Ali versus Williams. Ulysse dominated off the back foot, slipping and countering to devastating effect, exposing Seldon's lack of ring generalship at every second.
To throw the punches, whether they land on the face or whether they... Oh, good shot.
Straight right hand by Ulysses, second knockdown of Seldin. He is being embarrassed in front of the home crowd here in Montreal.
To Seldon's credit, even after being knocked down 3 times, he kept coming forward. In all honesty, staying down after the first knockdown would have done his career a favor, as the embarrassment that followed damaged his image beyond repair.
He did hit me with a good shot with the open palm of his fist early in the fight, but then he just backed away.
Throw excuses at you, but in my head I'm thinking...
I just think it was just the style. The style, we didn't expect him to run the whole time. We expected being on the big entertainment show, a big network, that he would come and fight. Because he ran so much, it made him look like a bad guy. And people don't want to see that. You can see that any day of the week watching an amateur boxing match, and that's pretty boring.
After such a poor display, HBO washed their hands with Seldon, and the Hebrew Hammer went back to knocking out club fighters on small shows. Seldon did defeat a 41-year-old Zab Judah in 2019, but the controversy surrounding the fight needs an entire video to itself. Meet Mark Gastineau, the all-pro defensive lineman for the New York Jets, the kingpin of the famed Sack Exchange, the AFC Defensive Player of the Year. A man that summed up the 80s sporting scene perfectly, with questionable hair, women, and steroids. A controversial figure both on and off the field, Gastineau's life choices kept his name relevant for many years, but eventually led to lawsuits and finally bankruptcy. With his physical prime nearing its end, Gastineau took one last roll of the dice and linked up with the infamous boxing promoter Rick Elvis Parker to cash in on some potential lucrative prize fights.
Mark Gastineau was big, white, and well-known. To Parker, that added up to a lot of money.
Parker, one of the sport's shadiest figures throughout history, somehow landed a deal with George Foreman's managerial team that, if he could bump Gastineau's professional record to 12-0, a very profitable showdown with the former world champion would be made for a pay-per-view event worth multi-millions.
So that was the mission, 12-0 in George.
Having experience in the game managing talent such as Burt Cooper and James Tillis, Parker knew Gastineau's chances of beating a game challenger were slim. So in turn, he elected for hand-picked and paid-off opponents that would simply fall over for an extra few $100. Fortunately for Gastineau, little interest was taken in his boxing career early on, allowing for some laughable play acting to count as professional victories, as seen here on his debut against the former pro wrestler Starfire Dukes.
Totally fixed. Total fixed fight.
Dukes, along with the other 8 opponents Gastineau had faced to this point, eventually came forward and admitted that they were paid to take a dive. Parker went as far as traveling to local construction sites to offer $1,000 to the men that were willing to get hit and stay hit.
Like a dumbass, say, yeah, you know, $1,000 in my pocket, you know, go in there and get hit, you know. What? take a fall. You know, I knew what was going on.
In the ring, Gastineau was an imposing figure at 6'6" and 250 pounds. Yet the first fighter he faced that refused Parker's bribes, in this case, Tim Anderson, went on to send a brutal reminder that the old saying, "You don't play boxing," is in fact accurate. A quick disclaimer here. A few of the next claims are alleged, and I can only cover the story with the limited information that I found while researching the topic. That being said, Gastineau and Parker weren't finished yet. A rematch was made with Anderson 6 months later, where, according to Anderson himself, Parker had arranged for a mysterious corner team to poison him throughout the bout, obviously without his consent. His claims were backed up by the fact he fell incredibly ill, not only during the fight, but for many years afterwards. And while doctors proved he was indeed poisoned, they couldn't cure him because they didn't understand what antibodies were needed to cure the substance in his body. This footage of the fight is extremely rare and only surfaced as recently as 2017 when the Free Doc Anderson YouTube channel, a username that will make sense very soon, uploaded the sought-after piece. Gastineau won the fight by a 6th round KO and moved on as if nothing had happened. Yet the devastating effects of the poisoning had Anderson bedridden for years, all the while desperate for the truth about that night in Oklahoma City. A few years later, an on-the-mend Anderson went looking for answers, but was met by a shocking message from Parker, who told him that any more inquiries would put his beloved quadriplegic sister Erin and her 2 daughters' lives at risk. Anderson laid low for a while before plucking up the courage to confront Parker one last time after hearing he was staying in a nearby hotel. Once Anderson gained access to the promoter's room, Parker was willing to talk, but denied any wrongdoing, and for confronting him on the issue, he allegedly threatened to kill Anderson's disabled sister once again. Anderson flipped, shot and killed Parker, and is now serving a life sentence in a correctional facility without parole. I had a feeling this feature might swerve out of control. After all, it was supposed to be about Mark Gastineau's boxing skills, or the lack thereof. But I figured talking about Gastineau without mentioning the Parker story would have been weird and incomplete. If you'd like to know more about this story in particular, let me know in the comments section below, and perhaps a full video on the topic could be made in the future. I never take my job and role as a YouTuber too seriously, but covering the lesser-known side of the sport, as we do on this series, takes a fair bit of time and research as the information is much more scarce than you'd think. So if you've made it this far, a thumbs up would be genuinely appreciated. Until next time, fight fans, this is Boxing Legends TV, signing off.